Now, I always thought that the humble apple crumble that we know and love today was one of those recipes that originated from thrifty housewives making the best of rationed ingredients as an alternative to apple pie during the Second World War. Now, while apple crumble was definitely popularized at the time for that reason, upon digging a little deeper, it appears that we have similar recipes that date back even further. What a rabbit hole this one turned out to be. Hi everyone, my name's Jake, welcome to The Kitchen Scrap, where I'm currently challenging myself to learn to survive on British World War II rations for an entire year.
I don't even know what that means, but it sounds almost as peculiar as you look.
Now, the first stop on our origin journey takes us to America, where a dessert they call apple crisps are sometimes referred to as apple crumble. Nowadays, the two dishes are so similar that we'd be splitting hairs to differentiate them, but traditionally speaking, apple crisps typically include oats and nuts in the streusel, which is the crumbly topping that we all love, whereas initially apple crumbles did not. It was basically just flour, sugar and butter, at least to begin with. But I would bet that most of us in Australia, New Zealand and the UK will nearly always include oats when we're making an apple crumble. Now, the earliest printed recipe for an apple crisp in America that I could find dates back to 1924 in a book called Everybody's Cookbook, a comprehensive manual to home cookery by Isabel Lord. Now, she was an American author with a bachelor's degree in library science who also wrote several books on home economics. Now, just because this was the first time it appeared in print, it doesn't actually mean that she wrote it or invented the dish. There is a lot of speculation surrounding this as well. But if we wind the clock back even further, we come across none other than the world famous Isabella Mary Beeton, more commonly known as Mrs. Beeton. Now, she became a household name with the publication of her book, Mrs. Beeton's Book of Household Management, which was published in 1861. This was a fascinating and comprehensive guide created to assist the rising middle classes with household management.
So it's not a cookbook, really. This is the mothership. This is going to show me how to be the mistress of the house. And she begins as she means to go on, as with the commander of an army, so it is with the mistress of a house.
Now, I'll circle back to the Supersizers a bit later, but supposedly there is a recipe for apple crumble floating around somewhere out there in one of Mrs. Beeton's books, published in the 1890s, which likely came from an earlier publication given she passed away in 1865. Now, I say supposedly because without a copy of my own, it's difficult to verify, as accounts as to which book or article it actually came from differ vastly depending on the website that you're reading, which is very frustrating. Now, it could also be the case that the original recipe was actually adapted from one of Mrs. Beeton's plum crumbles, which was relatively simpler, where the streusel mainly just consisted of plain breadcrumbs and a bit of sugar. Either way, I do feel like there is some truth in this because apparently apple crumble was quite popular in the royal court of Queen Victoria, where she's said to have preferred to eat it dry, that is, without cream or custard. So as the years passed, it looked as though apple crumble would be consigned to the pages of history until a sudden resurgence in popularity during the Second World War brought it back to the forefront once again. Aside from being a truly magnificent dessert, making all of those traditional gorgeous buttery pie crusts and pastries just wasn't feasible during the Second World War due to the scarcity of ingredients. It was considered wasteful and quite decadent. So crumbles were a fantastic alternative and helped people to feel satiated. Unfortunately, I don't think we'll ever truly know who officially invented the apple crumble, but I'm sure that we can all agree that we are thankful for its endurance. That being said, if there are any internet sleuths out there with better research skills than I have, I would love to get to the bottom of this. Do you accept this challenge?
Yes.
Now, all of this actually got me thinking about other recipes I thought originated in World War II, with carrot cake being one of them. Now, carrots are often turned to as a natural sweetener, and early records dating back as far as the 1500s showed that they were in fact used as a sweetener in various puddings. But it wasn't until 1814 when the former chef of King Louis XVI, Antoine Beauvilliers, published a recipe called Gâteau de Carreau. That's carrot cake for us common people. Now, the recipe appeared in the second volume of his cookbook, L'Art du Cuisiner, where it was quickly embraced the world over. Now, while this is debatable, it's worth mentioning that Antoine may have in fact been the first person to use the word restaurant to describe his eating establishment in 1765. Mind blown! But do you know what other delectable treat was invented during World War II? M&Ms. Yes, that's right. We all know what Smarties are, right? Those small, delicious morsels of chocolate covered in sweet sugar candy coating. They were the inspiration for M&Ms. Originally called chocolate beans, they've been in production since around 1882 by a British company called Rhubarb, but it wasn't until 1937 when they changed the name to Smarties. While the name Rhubarb is still in operation, they were eventually taken over by Nestle in the 1980s. Now the M's in M&Ms actually stand for Forrest Mars Sr., who was the son of the founder of the Mars Company, and Bruce Murray, the son of the Hershey's chocolate president. Now this union was very important. Not only did Hershey's have a 20% share in this would-be product, Hershey's also controlled the chocolate ration in the USA during the war. Now Forrest Mars essentially copied the idea for M&Ms when he found himself on the battlefield during the Spanish Civil War during the 1930s, where he saw soldiers eating British Smarties. So once he returned home and sorted out all of the legalities, got a patent, etc., he immediately went into production for M&Ms. Now both Smarties and M&Ms were pitched as a great way for soldiers to be able to enjoy their chocolate ration on the front without their chocolate melting, which makes sense. So it should come as no surprise that M&M's first customer was in fact the US Army, and during the Second World War they were sold exclusively to the military. So there you have it, a little daily dose of history for us all. Now let's get to today's video recipe, which is apple and rhubarb crumble. Now once again we are turning to Carolyn's amazing website for this recipe. I will link it down below. It's the 1940sexperiment.com. So for the filling, you will need 1 pound of rhubarb, 1 pound of tasty apples, and 2 tablespoons of golden syrup. For the topping, you will need 7 ounces of plain flour, 3 ounces of oats, 3 ounces of margarine or butter, whichever you prefer, 3 ounces of sugar. It also calls for an ounce of light brown sugar to sprinkle on top, but I think I'm going to omit that. So let's get cooking. So we're going to start off with the fresh produce, which was homegrown in my parents' garden. They recently paid me a visit and they bought me some of their rhubarb and apples. Now the recipe does call for a pound each, but I've got about half a pound of rhubarb and 2 pounds of apples. But I figured by the time that I peel and core the apples, it should equal about 2 pounds worth of fresh produce. So I'm just going to get these prepped now. It will take a little bit longer for the rhubarb to cook. We're just going to slice these up and cook them in a little bit of water for about 10 minutes. The apples will only take about 5 minutes. Okay, so I've been cooking down the rhubarb for about 5 minutes now. It's still got about another 5 minutes to go. I've just put on the apples. In both cases, there's just a little bit of water in each. I actually think the rhubarb is actually close to being done, so I've just turned down the heat very low. The recipe also calls for 2 tablespoons of golden syrup. So I figured I would just put in a tablespoon in each. Okay, this rhubarb is definitely done, so I'm just going to turn the heat off that. It's stewed right down in about 7 minutes. Okay, so the fruit component is ready. I am just going to combine the rhubarb with the apple. Also, side note, did you know that rhubarb is actually an excellent cleaning agent as well? So if you've got any dirty pots or pans with really dark stains, try boiling some rhubarb in it for about 10 minutes and then just simply rinse it out. It should help to lift the stains. I would prefer to eat the rhubarb though. We're just going to mix this all together. It's definitely going to be more of an apple crumble than a rhubarb and apple crumble, but that's okay with me. Time to make the crumble. So the crumble is actually very simple. I've just measured out 7 ounces of wholemeal flour, to which I shall add 3 ounces of oats. Just give that a mix. 3 ounces of sugar, 3 ounces of butter or margarine. Now I opted for butter this time because this is a decadent dessert and it deserves the best. So now I kind of cheated a little bit because the recipe did actually say to rub the butter into this mixture until it resembles breadcrumbs. But I'm a little bit time poor at the moment and I just want to speed things along, so I'll melt it in. So push this through. Oh, this is going to be gorgeous. So I think I'm going to have more crumble than I do fruit. The ratios are a little bit off here, but that's my fault. Who doesn't love a good crumble topping? Next, we're just going to pour our fruit mixture into our little 1940s style pan that my mum bought me. Thanks very much, Mum, I love it. Actually, this is the first time I'm using it as well. This is going to be a baby crumble with homegrown produce. That rhubarb cooked down quicker than I thought it would. I think we need to taste test this. Yes! Those apples are really tart in a great way. I was a little bit worried that the addition of the golden syrup would make it sickly sweet. This has a lot of sugar in it, and the recipe actually calls for even more sugar to be sprinkled on top, another ounce of brown sugar. I'm going to omit that though, because I'm personally not a fan of super sweet desserts. I don't know if I'm gonna need all of this crumble. We'll see how we go. I'm just gonna pour that on. It does say to layer it on thick, but I mean, we've got a lot of crumble here. I don't want to use that whole lot. That should keep in the fridge for a few days. I'll buy some more apples on the weekend and make another mini crumble. Now it says to cook it in the oven for 20 minutes at 170. So the crumble is ready. It's a little bit blonde, even though I left it in for an extra 15 minutes, so a total of 35 minutes in the oven at 170 degrees Celsius, but it smells absolutely divine. And I've just whipped up a little bit of custard, so I'm going to get stuck into this right away. So that's a pretty decent serving. So I think with a dish this size, you could easily get 4, maybe even 5 servings out of this. So I'm just going to pour this luscious, thick custard. Oh, look how thick that is. It's almost throbbing. Wow. Oh yeah. This smells so good. Better do a taste test with every component. That is absolutely gorgeous. So that crumble was absolutely delicious. I'm not actually sure what type of apples they were. I'll have to ask my mum and dad, but they were really tart and it just worked so well with the creamy custard and the sweetness of that gorgeous crumble. Honestly, it was just like the holy triad of perfection. So just quickly, I want to circle back to the Supersizers. There were 2 seasons, Supersizers Go and Supersizers Eat. All of the episodes are available on YouTube. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. Basically, the premise of the show is that Sue Perkins and Giles Corrin will spend a week eating their way through different eras in time. They cover the diets of the Elizabethans, the Victorians, the Edwardians, and more recently, the 70s and the 80s as well. And they get medically tested before and after each week so they can see the effects that the diet has had on their body. They are truly such a joy to watch. They are hilarious paired together on screen. Now, the reason I bring this up is because one of their episodes is dedicated to 1940s wartime rationing. And this was actually my first introduction to British World War II rationing. They didn't teach us anything about this stuff at the schools that I went to here in Australia. So thanks to that episode, that's where my whole curiosity with this aspect of social history began. Once again, I couldn't recommend the show enough. I'll link the wartime episode down below. Now, before we wrap up, I have an amusing little update for you. So in my previous video, when I was making the pastry for Lord Woolton's pie, I got a few comments from my friends giggling about the size of my teeny tiny rolling pin. Now, I've had this for years, and even though it is like an old friend, it is kind of a pain in the butt to use. And every time I do use it, I always think to myself, I've got to get a bigger rolling pin, but I just simply forget every time. Now, a few days after I posted that video, it suddenly dawned on me how ironic this actually was. Now, this is a true story. My uncle actually helped to design and build the world's biggest rolling pin. I'm not even joking. It sits and spins on top of a bakery, which is called Henry's Bakery in the town of Wodonga, about 4 hours away from where I live. It's even been verified by the Guinness Book of World Records as the largest rolling pin in the world. So there you have it. It's a tale of 2 extremes. But the plot thickens because the other day I received a surprise delivery in the mail. I graduated, you guys. I finally got an adult-sized rolling pin after all these years. Thanks very much, Mum. I really appreciate it. I feel like that was a bit of a roller coaster video that we had today. If you've made it this far, thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. I hope you're all having a beautiful and blessed day. And until next time, keep calm, and when life crumbles, make apple crumble.